Oh, go ahead, David. You got it.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Friday afternoons, 3 p.m. Pacific time, 6 p.m. East Coast time for Common Grounds of Self-Determination. This is episode 11. I'm one of the co-hosts, David Castillo. And before we get things started, I wanted to offer a well wishings and greetings to Dr. Charles Cole. It's his birthday today, and so I wanted to thank him for being here, for helping us kick things off today. Happy birthday, Charles!
Oh man, thank y'all for having me. Well, it's our show, but I'm glad that I was gonna be here, man. Even though I'm on hiatus from shows for a minute for my voice and the birthday and stuff, I couldn't leave y'all in the lurch, man. You know what I'm saying? So I had to be here for my guys. So I appreciate y'all, and I love the last episode too, man. Y'all were on it.
Hey man, happy birthday!
Thank you, man. Thank you.
Don't be playing this man kicking it in Miami, having himself a good ass time, looking better than Will Smith and the entire set of that video. He's dancing in the video, singing in the video. This man having a good ass time. Wishing you the happiest birthday, man. We're glad that you're back with us. I hope your voice is good.
The voice is coming back. As I almost coughed at that moment, the voice is coming back slowly. So I think next week I'll be fine. I'll be better. But look, I mean, O's been gone. You see his hair. You see these luscious locks that he came back with. What did Europe do to you, O? Like O is like Fabio out in this thing, brother. What's happening? Like I like it. Give us a shake.
Yo, we got hair, man. We got hair. It's going all over the place, man. Check it out. If you're on audio, the hair is long AF, as the kids say. I was telling the doc that like my inner soul is just melded with 80s gothic music and culture. Like I may be an affable person on the outside, but on the inside, I'm just Robert Smith and the entire New Order crew. So I'm just trying to get the hair to match these days, man. Just the hair to match what's going on the inside, which is just a happy melancholy.
That's what's up.
You like that oxymoron, man? Look at David. He's like, does that make any sense?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
But David, I'm excited for this topic, man. I saw the research and the pre-work, and I was like, and somebody got an echo, but I loved it, man. It was really dope. So tell us what that is, bro. And I'm down to. Yeah, like, I got excited when I saw the question that you raised.
Yeah, well, I think sometimes on the show we can get a little like head in the clouds, philosophical, theoretical. But the reality that we're in right now is, there are millions of young people that are preparing to go back to school. Some of them have already started in some of the year-round programs. Others are getting ramped up to head back in a couple of weeks, some next week. And so we're in this really important moment. And so I wanted to make sure that we bring this timely discussion to our followers and our listeners just around the reopening of school. I think, I don't know how many school-age children are in the United States, but we know, there are millions. And what we want to focus on this show is, what does that look like for Black and brown children returning to school, safely? We also, we'll get into it in a little bit here. What does it look like for families too? I think family engagement, schools, school systems, districts. I mean, there's been a paradigm shift around community engagement, and now it's like a very real thing, and that involves the reopening of school and all the communication that goes along with that. So we'll get into that, and then the persistent issue or challenge, and I'm just going to say it how I always say it, because everybody comes up with new words for it, and it's pretty much the same thing. The achievement gap, right? That was persistent prior to the pandemic, and in a couple of these, the New York Times put out a couple of pieces this week that really, further documented and highlighted that the achievement gap is growing for Black and brown children as a result of the pandemic and kind of being out of school or being in and out of school or, having low quality virtual schooling. And so we have this moment where we're not just trying to go back to school, but we know that specific groups of children have specific needs, and how are school systems prepared to do that, to continue the work, to double down on it going into this year. So that's the quick opener. I don't know how we wanted to handle this. Maybe just start with the first question. And when I say we, like, what do we need? Meaning like Black and brown folks, what do we need? What do our children need? What do our families need to return safely? And what are schools doing to ensure that happens? And I know, Omar, you have direct experience through your organization, so you can speak to that. And then we also, obviously, the three of us follow national trends. And it's going to look different, at your charter school network, Omar, than it would for like Chicago or New York or Los Angeles Unified, these big, massive systems. So I wanted to start there. Like, what do we need in order to return safely?
So I'm going to kind of frame this a little bit. And this is not going to make sense until it does. I was out at dinner last night, and El Paso's right on the border with New Mexico and Mexico. And I mean, like, for those of you listening who may not know El Paso very well, when I say we're on the border, I'm not talking about this like, oh yeah, like you drive 20 minutes down 20 miles down the road. I'm talking like you throw a rock and like there's Mexico and there's New Mexico. So we're out at dinner last night, and the restaurant we're at is in New Mexico. We're that close. Well, the standards and parameters for safety in these restaurants in New Mexico are radically different than that of Texas, despite the fact that these, places are so close to one another. And what this does, it shared this very interesting paradigm of, I just drove 10 minutes from my house, 5-10 minutes from my house, and the standards and regulations for safety are radically different in this restaurant than they are in the Texas restaurants 5 to 10 minutes away. You walk into a Texas restaurant, and I mean, it might as well be the Wild West with Yosemite Sam whipping out like dual guns and be like, woo! And it's like spring break, 1999 in Texas right now, and zero masks and zero regard. That I walk into this restaurant in New Mexico, and everyone has masks. Everyone is, well distanced from one another. They have a brand new filtration system. So what I want to get back to with David and Charles is that it's not just that we as superintendents and educators are trying to do our best to maintain safety when we return to school. It's that we are under the gun from our respective governors with radically different safety paradigms and safety regulations state to state that unfortunately as public schools we have to abide by. So my schools are in Texas. I'm trying to get solid distance together and mask, everyone kind of like wearing masks while they're in close proximity with one another. But like, I am powerless to mandate any of those things because Governor Greg Abbott is essentially like, nope, if you do that, Omar, or any public entity, there will be severe consequences. Whereas New Mexico, it's a radically different situation. Yep. So I guess what I'm trying to say, David, is that we are obviously trying to figure out what is best for our students, distancing them, asking for masks, asking for as many, vaccinations as possible. But we in no shape or form have support from our governor to mandate that. What's the state of situation in California? What's the state of situation in Illinois? And how are we finding ourselves, I think, either in conjunction with or at odds with our state safety regulations?
Yeah, and it's all over the place too. I mean, I'm not going to pick on Texas, but I'll specifically.
I mean, you should, man. Like Texas is nuts right now.
Yeah, I'm gonna say like Conroe Independent School District. Where's Conroe?
I think Conroe's outside of Houston, but
okay. So think about Conroe, this school district in Texas, and then think about the lockdowns that are happening in Australia right now. I'm just going to illustrate the wide gap in how people and governments and localities are responding to this. Australia has gone on, Southern Australia, much of it has gone back on the full lockdown because they had a couple of deaths, right? A couple. Meanwhile, in Conroe, Texas, the superintendent has come out and said that even children that have COVID diagnosis must attend school.
Jesus.
So anyways, like it's all over the place, right? Charles, from your take, I know you've worked a lot with families and the idea of safety is not just one around COVID, but also like, families feeling welcomed and feeling safe and confident that schools are going to take care of their children, right? Yeah. Not just academically, but social, emotional well-being. What's been your experience, and what do you think schools need to be doing?
Well, I think for the reasons that y'all just stated, is going to even make my answer even stronger in the sense of, as of now, you got to be a real critical thinker, and you have to think about the survival of your child physically and mentally and spiritually. And what I mean by that is everything is so politicized right now. Everybody is trying to play the Twitter waves and like what's going to get me good press, what's going to make people feel good, as opposed to what's actually the best or what I would do for my own child. So you can be out here slap boxing in the political streets with these people if you want to, and your baby or your grandparents is going to face those consequences because we not like taking the proper precautions. Or you have to turn the public political private. And what I mean by that is you have to ask the question of what is best for me, my child, and my family. And you have to work from that space because the government system is not looking out for your best interest. It's looking out for like a political ideology, whether it's the extreme of Texas or the other extreme of Australia. And so I saw David was trying to, yes, take the public politically, like the political public piece, and you have to make it private. You have to say, look, I can get into spats all day and argue for hours and hours about what's right, what's wrong, mask, no mask, COVID this, COVID that, whatever the case is. And people can argue with you because you're talking about other people's kids. But when David Castillo is talking about his child and his family and his abuela and like the elders in his life, now the stakes of that conversation have changed, and it doesn't really matter what a lot of people have to say about what David is thinking, because David has turned the public political into something very, very private. And that's where you have to start with the critical thinking of this, because we can fall into these political games, but private people are going to pay the consequences for these decisions and this fear. So that's where I kind of land on it. Hopefully that makes sense. I'll blog about it, David, since my voice isn't all the way back, but I'll blog about it so it can kind of make sense for people. And if you are a Black or brown parent, and there's another question I won't be here for, but I want to roll it into that, David, if that's cool, is all this learning loss. Now, again, the public conversation isn't even about the learning loss. It's about what to call learning loss. Is it learning loss? Is it this? And I get it. I understand it, right? But that conversation, while important, is not nearly as important as the actual facts that Black and brown kids are falling another 4 or 5 or 6 months behind in a system where they were already years behind in a system that does not love them. So again, I can have these public conversations around ideology and all this stuff and play these games that these two warring gangs are having and be in the middle of it. Or I can say, yo, what does my community need? What does my child need? What does my family need? What does my school need if I'm working in a school system like that, like you two are? And answer it from a very private humanitarian place first, and then work outwards. Because these systems do not care about your baby. They don't care about your kid. You will be just another number of somebody who passed away, who died, or who the tick, or whatever the case is, right? They will politicize it either way. So you have to be a little bit more selfish, because we are not adult enough and mature enough at the moment to actually have the public discourse that we need that's laid in facts.
Damn.
All righty then. Thank you for joining us today. Common Grounds of Self-Determination. We'll see you next week. Yeah. That was pretty, trying to respond to that. Omar, what are your thoughts? I mean, what I basically am hearing is like, the return to schools, how we go back, how, what questions or demands that families put in front of their schools, how schools respond, sort of a localizing, like we're going back to either continuing to build or like rebuilding from scratch relationships between students, families, and schools. And I think, earlier I noted that it does feel like there's a paradigm shift. I mean, it's going to be long-term work, but I think that's the realest way to say it is the stakes got really high. They're still high, and parents and students and families are going to be paying attention like they've never paid attention before regarding the education of their children and the safety.
Absolutely.
There's a lot of directions to go with this, and I'm just going to start out with, I think, the sentiment overall in Texas and in El Paso, which is very, very basic, which is like, I am ready to get these damn kids out of the house. So let's stew on this just for a minute. So, the doc obviously getting deep into steering away from the politicization of the situation and getting into like what is best health-wise for my kids. These parents are like, fuck this shit. We need to get the hell out of here. We want to get back to work. We are tired. We want to get back to normal. I don't give a shit if my kid is in a sardine can, canned up with 17 other fucking kids and shit. Like, I just want my kid the hell out of here so that I can do these things. What that is a microcosm for, particularly with at least my parents in the state of Texas, is that we as educators focus immensely on the holistic needs of children, the education of children, their lack of performance before they got to school with us, how we're going to make up those gaps, the macro consideration of the achievement gap scenario, the micro achievement gap deficiencies that we have in our students. And sometimes we just forget the bare bone basics of our parents, which are basically like, I'm trying to get my life back in order. I need to get back to work. I don't need my kids here. I don't care where they're at. Shove them into any school because my life needs to get back into order. The problem with that then becomes, and this gets into a different conversation, is that in El Paso, you have a lot of like low-income parents. They need to get out. They need to work. They're working 2 to 3 jobs. Their life's dependent on it. So what you have is this very interesting paradox where our parents are like, send them to school because we really need to get back to work. And then on the other end, we have parents that are actually very cognizant of the fact that like we're worried about sending them to school because Abuelita is in the house. Abuelita's 80 something years old. She's of the most vulnerable population. So you've got this radical paradox of, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Like, I need to go out and work, but then the second intuition kicks in. It's like, what about Abuelita? Then the third intuition kicks in, which is like, if I get sick, now I'm out of work for a month. I don't have healthcare, or a week. So for us, we are trying to placate parent. Well, placate's the wrong word. Assure parent as best as possible that we're going to distance our kids. We're going to follow safety regulations. We're going to ensure that we're, doing temperature checks. And that's just the bare bone basics until we get them back into school, David. And our scores plummeted this year. So the topic this month, or excuse me, this week is all about what are we facing as students come back to school, and we see that they dropped 17 to 22 percentage points in comparison to affluent parents, according to the few articles that we were reading together from for out of Philadelphia, New York Times, dropped maybe 7. The likelihood that the affluent kids are going to jump right back up is pretty high. And I think the realization is, was this precipitous drop the result of the pandemic, or just does it expose the inherent difficulties that we face working with Black and brown kids, in that there's just not enough resources, there's not enough programmatic solutions to the deep needs that they have. So for our listeners who are like, what the fuck is going on? Yeah, man, exactly. We are dealing with the safety of kids, parents basically being like, I don't give a shit, I want them back in school. Then parents being like, oh, I give a shit because we could all get sick. Oh, now that they're back in school, what are you going to do about, Geraldo's scores dropping 15 points in 1 year? And I think that you, the doc, and I are faced in a quagmire of where do we even begin? Where do we start? What's the most important? And what's our focus on this year as we try to return back to school?
But I don't know if he froze or if I froze, but can you hear me, David?
He's back. Yeah, we're good.
Okay. Yeah, you froze a little bit. Oh, but I mean, and I'm gonna leave. I know I'm on my minutes restriction. That's what they do in the NBA when you come off an injury, right? So I'm gonna get off in a second. But I agree with what you said. And my thing was, our show is called Common Grounds of Self-Determination, right? So the starting point that you have for me is our humanity and what that is. If you Black and brown in a system that is not putting that well-being first, it's not putting your mental, your how we're actually schooling kids first, or whatever the case is. Now, if we putting on other hats as like a system, right? I think the quagmire becomes a little bit more of an issue. And I have my political thoughts about all this stuff too. You know what I mean? What I'm just saying is that because of arbitrary lines that have been drawn, whether you happen to live in Australia or you happen to live in this town in Texas, right? Like, things can be just so drastic by this like imaginary line. And if you Black or brown, I just don't think these systems are looking out for you in the way that they need to. So you have an added pressure point. Like, I'm not talking to David, the school leader. I'm talking to David, the dad, right? Like, I'm talking to David, the son or the grandson, you know what I mean? Who might have a really close-knit family and loves to be with his elders all the time, right? And what that may mean, right? I'm talking to O as like the conduit of his community, right? So, but I love this. I love this topic. And I think that we have to keep asking these questions. I just think this is where critical thinking comes in. And different people are going to come up with different answers. Different people are going to say, you know what, my kids being in school physically is the best thing for them and my family at this time. And this is what we're going to do. And there are going to be some other people that have different sets of resources, or are just like, you know what, I can't risk that. I need to do X, Y, and Z. And right now, Black people are the fastest growing group of homeschoolers now. And that was before the pandemic. So that's only been exacerbated since the pandemic. And now that you have unions negotiating the hazard pay for teachers, like, it seems like a lot of people being taken care of, except for those families and those kids that don't have much recourse. So I saw something. That's how I'm looking at it.
I saw something about this hazard pay. I know it's happening across the country, but I saw something specific to Detroit public schools, right? Teachers getting hazard pay. All right. And something like, I thought Oakland was bad. Their illiteracy rates for African-American children is something like over 80%, something like that. Yeah, like it's crazy. I'm like, I don't know. That's, if you're gonna get hazard pay, if you're gonna, if you just get some kind of compensation boost, like, where is the benefit to children? So that's a big thing to overcome. Yeah.
And I'm about to hop off, man, but I'll just leave y'all with this final thought. In Richmond, right? And y'all know this, and Jorge was just in the comments, in Richmond, and you might not notice, Omar, it's so polluted. It's super polluted that like all these kids have like asthma. There's a generation of kids with asthma, and they get paid. They like these kids, like I have friends that got a check every month for this stuff. Now, if we start looking at literacy rates done to kids in the same way that's putting them in similar predicaments, what could that look like for us? I'm leaving on that, y'all. I love you fellas, man, and I can't wait to be back in full force next week.
Hey, enjoy your birthday, enjoy Miami, and happy birthday, man.
I love you boys, and David, the controls are handed back to you, brother.
All right,
man. Hey,
trying to mess this up.
this dude dropping the mic before he hands David the keys, not only to the studio but to the Millennium Falcon and shit.
Yeah, he kind of did that twice. He dropped the mic twice on us within 30 minutes.
Massive mic drops, man. From the
I'm like, go easy on us, Cole. Man. Yeah. All right. So, yeah, I mean, I think, let's see. I was thinking about, so there's like this mental health component, right? Which is real, right? It's something that schools are having to rethink, reprogram, you know, with some of this federal money and state money, hiring additional counselors, social workers, whatever it may be. During the pandemic, at least in my microcosm of Oakland, California, you know, we saw families experienced the pandemic in so many different ways, right? And I think for many young people, and I think this is maybe reflective of some of that data that we were talking about, you know, many students had access to pods or other kinds of, like, you know, learning environments, probably some tutoring involved, and, you know, pushing the envelope in terms of what you could actually do during the lockdown. So, you know, many children remain somewhat active, right? And that's good. It's good for the body. It's good for the mind, good for the soul, for the spirit. In higher poverty areas, in Oakland specifically, I mean, where kids had parents that were essential workers that had to work, never stopped working. I mean, there were young children home alone all day in a house, right? I mean, just literally like lockdown, right? With the subpar, you know, distance learning happening. And so, you know, that's more than a year, right? And so that shows up in many different ways. And I actually don't think this is going to be the new pandemic. The development of the pandemic is going to be this mental health, call it a crisis that it will be uncovered as students return to school. Teachers, counselors, social workers, principals, administrators, you know, we're the ones in schools that can sometimes identify children or screen for children that are in some kind of need of support, right? And it feels like that's going to be a big shift for schools as we return in the fall. And I'm going to add one more thing, and I want to get your take on this. I don't know, and it's connected, so I'm not rambling. You know, if you are a student that has a special, like, learning style, call it special needs, exceptional children, special education, you have what is called an individualized education plan, an IEP, right? It's a legally binding document. It lays out accommodations, services, supports, goals, metrics. You know, it's an accountability plan for a child, right? The IEP. I've seen some, I think from the Memphis Lift, Sarah Carpenter, they've been running a campaign that is calling for not an IEP, but an ILP for every student coming back. Every student should have an individualized learning plan that kind of addresses both the academic, social, emotional needs for children. So, as a superintendent of a charter school network, what are your thoughts on that? I mean, is that something that you all do when your kids are coming back? I mean, it's obviously not business as normal. We're not coming back. You're not opening the school doors and starting where you left off a year and a half ago. What are you doing to kind of capture that information and then hold yourselves accountable for making sure that you're getting down to that level of support for individual kids?
I've got so many different directions to go with this. I'm going to address the question first, and then I'm going to start going off on a couple of different tangents. So directly with what's going on with the El Paso Leadership Academy, great question. David, we've always had an individualized education plan for every child, period. That was written into the charter. We at first called it like student-centered academic plans, like SCAPs. It's, whatever we want to call it. We took best practices from special education and said, all right, if every student has an individualized plan, why don't we do that for every child? And it doesn't need to be extraordinarily detailed.
Nope.
It needs to just say a couple of things. First, what's the literacy level of this child? What's the math level of this child? Then it just has some really great details like what is the best learning modality for this child? What are some triggers? What are the things that we need to know about in terms of their parents and their background? Mm-hmm. What doesn't work for this child? What works best for this child? And we have these like outstanding dossiers that we send year to year to year to this, like from 6th grade to 7th grade to 8th grade, that follows the child now into 9th grade, that details exactly, all right, well, this student is in the 9th grade, but they started our school in the 7th grade at the 1st grade reading level. Okay, sink your teeth into that just for a second. If they started with us in 7th grade at the 1st grade reading level, and look, just to boast a little bit, I'm very proud of the El Paso Leadership Academy. We are ranked 2nd in the state of Texas for academic gains compared to any other middle school in the state of Texas. Why? Because we got some individualized learning plans for every kid. We got the data. We are sinking our teeth into the fact that if this student is reading at the 1st grade level, if we're teaching him 7th grade TEKS, hey, we're mandated by the state to do that. But if that's only what we're doing, and we're not catching this student up very strategically, or as our ex-governor would say, with strategery. Yeah, that dude. I love how everyone's all loving on that dude because he's painting shit and he sent our entire country into a abysmal failure of a recession.
Yeah.
Anyways, fuck that guy. Anyways,
GW.
We will, fuck that dude, man. We are growing our kids 2 to 3, 3 to 4 grade levels a year. So yes, I have people being like, well, Omar, like this student and these students aren't, getting these raw scores on the state exam. And I'm like, well, they came to me in 6th grade at the 1st grade reading level. Yes, they did not pass the 7th grade STAR exam, our state exam, at the 7th grade level because we built them up to about the 4th grade in 1 year, which they're blaming us for that. And I'm saying, blaming us for that? What the fuck are you talking about? Why aren't you blaming the elementary school for keeping the student illiterate for 6 years? Yep.
Yeah, that's an antiquated system. And I know in California right now, we're finally turning the corner on that. Whereas, and I'll explain this really quickly, whereas any school I ever worked for, and I know some of the top charter school networks, and some districts were operating at the level where it was, when you talk about achievement, you're not just talking about like absolute performance, grade-based performance on an assessment. That's important, but you also have to take into consideration longitudinal growth, right? How is the student doing over time? So it's not a child's responsibility or fault that they came to your school vastly underprepared. Now you're in a situation where you need to make up for some lost time, right? And students can, you're talking about accelerated learning, tracking that too, and celebrating that. But the large statewide systems and districts, they're just not operating at that level, at least based on what I've seen. It's some of the innovation that I've seen mainly in the charter school networks.
And I'm excited to hear that that's happening in California, but I want to make this kind of roundabout and applicable to our listeners. And they're saying, well, why does this matter to me? like this is very technical talk. The reason that this matters and the reason that I think this is important, David, is that we at the El Paso Leadership Academy, like we are doing all these plans and we have this incredible growth rate and we're growing kids 2 to 3 grade levels a year because we got these individual plans for kids, and we're able to very, very precisely target the exact needs of children and then use the school day in a very creative way in order to recapitulate those gains. So it's not just happening with after school tutoring, but to the parents, to the folks out in the world, I have to ask you, is your school district being that strategic with your child? And I want that to sink in for a second. If you're fortunate enough to come to David's school in Oakland, if you're fortunate enough to come to the El Paso Leadership Academy, there is a literal disease out there. It is not just the pandemic, it is the achievement gap and illiteracy and the fundamental inequity of educational opportunity for Black and brown kids that we are literally devising a cure for. But we are working in these isolated labs. What is going on in your school district? Same old bullshit. Like, do they use data to address these situations? Maybe, maybe not. Does the principal know what to do? Maybe, maybe not. Do the teachers know how to use this data? Do the teachers have access to an individual plan for every child to be like, okay, I know that this child is at the 3rd grade reading level and this child is at the 5th grade reading level, so I can change it up to make, the necessary prescription for this child. It's basically, we are microsurgeons, David, working with our students, and this is why we have such excellent results. The school districts are literally like just with one big ass syringe trying to just inject some kind of serum into every child and hoping that works. Yeah. And what I'm trying to tell our listeners is that these school districts have such antiquated ideologies. And then you wonder, well, why? Well, I mean, dude, like, you remember when Al Franken was asking Education Secretary Betsy DeVos, whatever her name is.
Bestie DeVos.
Bestie, yeah. What the difference was between raw academic data and like academic gains. And she was like, yo, I don't know what you're talking about. And he's like, you're Secretary of fucking Education.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying.
Exactly. I remember exactly that. I remember that moment. Yeah. I saw that.
And it's a funny ass moment, but it's an indicative moment to be like, do our school district leaders even know the difference? These are all like, these superintendents are corrupt D-list politicians, man. We got some really wonderful superintendents in this country right now. I know like Long Beach is doing some crazy cool shit, but for all the badass superintendents in Long Beach and in Dallas ISD and the Davids of the world, you've got these like corrupt ass, like, I'm committing it. Socorro Independent School District just had to release their superintendent because they're essentially going to investigate whether he was complicit in absolute educational fraud, where he was just complicit in allowing principals to give students credit for courses that they never took.
Oh, read about that grade changing scheme. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, man. And like, this is what I'm getting at to our listeners is that while we are trying to prescribe these incredibly difficult and intrinsic strategies to solve situations for kids, you got all these like broke ass bitches who don't give a fuck, who are earning hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, who don't give a shit about your kids, their health, the results of this academic achievement gap period, the exacerbation of it as a result of the pandemic, nor their fucking mental health. This cat in Socorro just got $600,000 to leave.
Yeah, oh my God, the big payout. Yeah.
Yeah, man. And like, that's a microcosm for superintendents around the country that are like, these fucking like bloated douchebags don't know shit about education, don't know shit about kids, don't know shit about prescriptive opportunities. We're relying on them right now during this crisis to be the microsurgeons that we need. And this kind of goes back to you, which is if we need microsurgery, and in some cases we're getting that, in a lot of cases we're getting a syringe, and in most cases we're just getting, Mayor Quimby from fucking, Springfield, who doesn't give a shit, getting a $600,000 payout after they committed fucking fraud.
Yeah.
Where are our kids going to land? And it's not just where our kids going to land, David. I have to ask, what are the long-term ramifications of what just happened in the next 5 to 10 years for our kids and for this country?
Yeah, I mean, so I think we talk about we got a little technical talking about some of the student academic achievement data. All that's important because it starts to show up in other data points, right? So there are a couple of big ones. The biggest one is probably graduation, right? Is a student, or are subgroups of students graduating on time with their peers? In California, and more specifically in Oakland, I'm just thinking about like big systems, big districts, accountability, and playing fuzzy math with numbers. So the reason I'm bringing this up is because we've just had this major disruption of education and schooling for young people, and the starting point for many kids was not good, and it's just it was exacerbated now by the pandemic. So I'm going to share a couple of numbers with you, and then we'll talk about the implications for these children down the road. They're not children; they're young adults now. An organization in Oakland just did a quick analysis of unpacking graduation rates for Black and brown children in the Oakland Unified School District, right? The overall, the graduation rate has gone up over time, and they like to tout that number. It's like, let me look under the trunk, under the hood. I want to look a little deeper, right? So looking at like longitudinal data, 4 years ago, about 1,300 Latinx students entered the 9th grade, right? In Oakland Unified School District. Of that total number, 4 years later, only 465 of those 1,300 graduated with the credits so that they could attend public university in California, right? The A through G. So from 1,300, you get down to 465, right? Of that 1,300, 461 didn't even graduate, right? I mean, I enjoy gambling. I enjoy spending time in casinos. I enjoy betting. Those are not good odds, right? Let's look at one more.
Odds, man. That's terrible, fucked up. Like, what? I mean, we should do break that down again, because the percentages are absolutely horrific.
So
you said 1,300.
1,300 started.
Yeah, and then 400 and how many?
4 years later, only 465 of those kids graduated with the A through G requirement, right?
Damn.
And this is a big system, here's another one. 4 years ago, 683 Black students entered Oakland Unified School District's 9th grade. Okay. 4 years later, only 200 of those met the UC CSE requirements, right? So from 683 to 200, right? Not graduating, we know what happens with Black and brown youth for the most part. Low income work, involvement with the criminal justice system, incarceration, and or death, right? That's just what it is. You're either working in a low skill, low wage job, or it just gets worse from there. With a high school diploma, Students can access other types of opportunities, training, vocational kinds of things. But the A through G, the college eligibility, is really the deal changer for many of these kids that are, for the vast majority, first generation in their families to attend college or university, right? And so that's the impact. It's I'm thinking about the pandemic and the pre-existing school to prison pipeline, and how the pandemic is really kind of setting us up to accelerate the school to prison pipeline for Black and brown children. That's what I have to say.
The ramifications are going to be significantly bigger than people imagine it to be. So these are under good circumstances. So just to break this down really quick, David was talking about 1,300 students, Latinx, 465 were eligible for public university. That is 36% of Latinx kids ready to go. And maybe some listeners are like, that's tragic, but I don't give a shit. I'm going to get real with them in a second. Then you've got on the African American, the Black side, you got 683, 200 of those. That's 29%. So we're basically condemning 2 out of 3 Latinx, 2 out of 3 Black kids, essentially to low wage or prison. Now, for our listeners who are like, why should I care? Because my kids are going to be just fine. Or what are the ramifications? In the state of Texas and the state of California, ladies and gentlemen, the majority of kids in school are of minority descent. They are Black and brown. In Texas, brown's going to be the new white. Brown will be the majority. And I mean quick in Texas. And what the reports are demonstrating, ladies and gentlemen, is that if we are not educating our Black and brown kids to take these high-skilled jobs, middle and high-wage jobs, not the low-skilled jobs, what you're doing is condemning your state to poverty. Because who the hell is going to take the job? And you're like, well, my kid's going to be fine. Your kid may be fine going to whatever state that they can get a job in, competing against Chinese and all the other great folks out there who are extraordinarily high skilled. But is your state fine? Are the economic resources of your state going to be fine? Is taxpayer money going to help with all the social services that we all take for granted, that we all think that we don't use, but you definitely use it? And say to yourself, oh, I'm cool with my state being completely condemned into poverty because I can get up and move. Can you? Can you? If your family's in Texas, if all of your tios and abuelas and all the people that you love are in Texas, you're all just going to get up and move. What I'm saying here is that the education of our children isn't just a social issue. At this point, it's not even just a civil rights issue about providing some level of equity because it's the right thing to do. I am saying fundamentally, ladies and gentlemen, it is now becoming an economic issue. And if the United States doesn't get its shit together and start educating Black and brown kids at the deep levels that we need to, we are condemning this country into poverty because we will not be able to compete on a global level. So that is why you all at home should give a shit about what is going on with Black and brown kids, because your kid is going to wake up into a reality where they personally may be fine, but the country that they live in is not. And good luck getting your ass to Germany or Sweden or Finland or Scandinavia or any of those countries that are also kind of racist and definitely not allowing you into their country unless you're not only high skilled, but you can offer a service that they are not already getting their kids into with their free universities, with their free resources, with their wraparound services that they've been doing since World War II that we fucked up hardcore around the Nixon era. Because why? oh, fuck social programs. We should be pulling ourselves up by the bootstraps. The next time I hear some fucking ignorant ass shit tell me about the bootstraps that they pulled up after they had a family, 2 parents, a community that supported them, plenty of income, the fact that they could go home and do homework, fuck you. Shut the fuck up, you and your bootstraps. You don't know shit about the real world.
No,
so this is why.
Gucci bootstraps.
Yeah, they're Gucci bootstraps. So this is what I'm getting to. And David, this is talking about the economic quagmires.
Yeah.
We haven't even dove into what the mental health situation is going to be of our kids who are left alone for an entire year.
Yeah.
You know, basically being unattended to at a very difficult age and allowing what, like TikTok to babysit. What is going to happen, not just to our kids academically? What are the mental health ramifications? Because I want to go down that
social experiment. It's the greatest social experiment. We don't know, right? You know, and I was fortunate. I mean, my family is fortunate that, you know, we were able to, you know, be kind of, this thing goes down. You're like, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? You know, and we started to like, you know, pull a lot more tighter on like family, you know, in Oakland when we were there, and able to like form a pod, right? So I actually taught a group of between 7 and 9 children, you know, 3 times a week in my home. We created a homeschool pod learning environment for kids, mainly family, and then some, you know, secondary family. Throughout the whole pandemic, man, I was like a teacher again, working with kids, because we knew like kids need to be around other kids. And, you know, I also got to see I also got to experience firsthand the level of education that the kids are receiving through these screens. Right. And that's a whole other show for sure. I don't want to get fired up about that right now. We got 7 minutes left. Yeah, I mean, that was, you know, I mean, we set it up. We set our lives up around doing the best for our kids. How you know, how can we minimize the disruption here for them? But, you know, for kids that didn't have that benefit, or living in other situations, yeah, you're right, man. We haven't even unpacked that yet. I forgot my train of thought here, but maybe it will come back to me. So I think that the one other thing I wanted to share, and this is not an overwhelming like endorsement of charter schools. I have plenty of beef with charter schools. I've closed charter schools down. I've advocated to have charter schools closed down. You know, it's not, I mean, if you're a good charter school, if you're doing work ethically with keeping children at the center, you know, good for you. But I think that the idea is that, you know, charter schools and even some of the bigger charter networks are, they're more flexible, right? More nimble, and better equipped to deal with situations like this. The closing, how do you do virtual, distance, and now reopening? And so my question is like around this idea of an individualized learning plan for every kid, right? Your school was doing it, right? I've always done it in my schools. It's a very basic concept, right? You're like, you're a child. Let's create a document and create some accountability for everybody, ensuring that like we're providing a service to you. But my question is like, how does that get translated? I see it in pockets around the country, some districts, but how does that get translated into the really big, massive systems where most of our children attend school? Like, is that even a thing?
I think this is what, I mean, this is exactly what I was going to mention right now anyways, which is, first and foremost, I want to back you up on one thing. Like, I am, without sounding overly political, I'm in favor of good schools, and I will always be in favor of good public schools. Because like if you're public and you're killing it traditional, like I'm all about it and I want to learn from it. If you're public and doing horrific, I want you to feel the wrath and the accountability that we on the charter side feel from the deep level of accountabilities that we face.
Woo.
If you're
Say
charter,
it.
hell yeah, man. If you're charter and you're killing it, you need to be at the forefront of working with these big public school districts, because that is exactly the prescriptive remedy that I think that we need, is that are the great school districts and the great charters working with one another and saying, how do we figure out how to do this together? Because I'm small, I'm nimble, I can figure things out, and what could work in a large school district? And are we having those conversations?
Yeah.
And you know, on the other side of this quadrant, if you're a shitty charter and you're just like, you know, show horsing out there, and you're full of shit and you did this for all the wrong reasons, including monetary reasons, fuck you. Close you down. We don't need your ass. Get the fuck out of it. Like, let the adults talk while your ass is out there getting into, I don't know, some like show business bullshit, because you never should have been in this game to begin with.
Yeah, and it makes it that much harder for all of us that are, you know, wanting to do the real ethical hard work.
Absolutely. They give us a terrible name.
Yeah.
And the thing is that on the other side, I need these big school districts who are floundering, who are condemning our kids to poverty, who haven't been doing academically well for 50 years, who are doing ludicrous financial malfeasance, to, you know, not get a hand slap. I need their asses taken over. Like, you ain't doing the job, I'll come in and do the job. We will. But herein lies, I think, a direct answer to your question, is that education is filled with ego. And I'm sick and tired of it. I'm sick and tired of the ego. I'm sick and tired of the I know best. I'm sick and tired of, like, politically we can't work with charters. What kind of horse shit is that? You're trying to tell me that I have figured out a recipe for kids to be not only loving school and having, you know, during the pandemic, when, you know, our local school districts had a 68% attendance rate, we had a 95% attendance rate. Yeah, man, they love our school.
Yeah.
You're trying to tell me I got this recipe where we're growing kids 2 to 3 grade levels a year and just absolutely dominating the academic recourse. What you're trying to tell me is that we've got this recipe, and because of political reasons and egotistic reasons, you're not even open to having a conversation with me about what we could do to take this recipe and make it into a really beautiful large vat that we could then disseminate to school districts across the country, because it will make large scale gains. That is the problem, David, is that we are dealing with people who are not only egotistical, but so political that they won't even have charter school like us, charter folks like us in the room, because it causes so much of a headache. And that is the very first step that we need to start having amongst public officials. Like, I got to tell you, David, like, I'm not even invited to, like, superintendent meetings in El Paso.
Yeah. Like the kids, like the kids that you serve in your school live in some kind of charter zone neighborhood that's not part of the city limits of El Paso, Texas. Get over it, people, man.
And that's the shit.
They live in the community. Their families in the community. They're, you know, it's like all the same kids, right?
Well, they like to think that it's like this, like, crop of, like, amazing kids, and, like, this is why you're having such exceptional results, Omar, because you're cherry picking kids and you're getting the kids whose parents care. And I'm like, my parents just like your parents. In fact, my parents are having even greater difficulties than most of your parents. They came to my school because they felt like there was no other option, because the school district was failing them so bad that they were like, man, I'll try anything. And this is what I'm getting at, David, is in Oakland, if your school and your officials weren't having conversations with Oakland, you know, Unified School District, why not? And if across the country, we're not beginning to break down these barriers of hate, animosity, control, ego, political bullshit. I was going to say politicalization, but it, like, keeps getting caught up in my mouth. Then all we're doing is disparaging kids. And this is the same old game that adults have been playing. And all David and I are saying is, like, did we need a pandemic and this horrific scenario for all of us to get clearer heads about what we're doing for kids, or is this only going to keep the same status quo bullshit together?
Yeah.
So this is why we got this show, man. That's why we got this show.
It's good. I feel like we got a couple of different directions for the next like 10 shows now, man.
I hope so, man.
I think, the larger umbrella concept is like charters and district schools working together, right? We've been saying that for a long time. My very first time I met with an Oakland Unified School District board member, this is probably like 20 years ago, right? He comes to visit my school because we had good outcomes for kids. And he's like, I want to come and learn what your secret sauce is and put you out of business. And I'm like, I don't care. Yeah. I don't care what kind of school this is, man. Let's put them all out of business, right?
Yes.
That doesn't matter to me. What matters is like the impact and the outcome for children. I don't care what kind of school it is, what you call it, how you label it. I know we're doing it here, and here's why. It never happened. But I think what I'm hearing you say is like just, especially coming out of this pandemic, best practices. If folks have figured out how to better support students and families, Black students and brown students and families, break down the silos, right? And let's share best practices around, what you're doing that is working, especially in this critical moment, is what I'm hearing from you, Omar.
I think very much so. And it goes into, why are we not creating these like consortiums of really smart, intelligent, good folks, public school and charter, working together and saying, how do we fix this scenario for a city? How do we fix this scenario for a region? Like, I don't know why I'm not sitting down on a monthly basis with the mayor of El Paso, the superintendents of every school district, and like the most badass educators, and saying, what's our 5-year plan for addressing all this? Because y'all's 10-year plan literally looks like the Joker wrote it.
Yeah.
And I'm like, this 10-year plan ain't shit. And this other plan ain't going to do it. Yeah. What are we going to do collectively as a region and as a city to do that? And until we get to that point, we're still going to be in these silos fighting one another, and we're not going to be getting these results. And I got to tell you, I love that this dude said, I want to put you out of business. My job is to put myself out of business, is to empower the school districts with how to do this so that there is no need for an El Paso Leadership Academy.
100%. See, people don't say that. I mean, I've always said the same. I'm like, charter schools are not an end all. I mean, it's like they're a temporary thing. They're here now. But ideally, like this is, our districts are actually like, serving all of our subgroups and communities. So we don't need to have this like different approach, right? Not where we are right now. I think we're gonna wrap up here. We're pretty much over time, but I wanted to end on this thing, and then I'll let you close it out. I've done a fair amount of like political work in Oakland and the Bay Area, California. Political campaigns, different types, and part of that is like you go and there's a whole infrastructure of how you pull voter logs, and you figure out like where you need to go, whose door you're going to knock on, what is their voting history, Democrat, Republican, all the stuff you can pull, and then you go and you start knocking on people's doors. You're like, hey, Omar Yanar for school board, and you want to knock on doors that are frequent voters, right? Because they're going to vote, and that's the best bang for your buck. Sometimes, especially in a town like Oakland, you're going up the hill in these districts because people, they tend to have a higher voting percentage, and you're trying to win, and so you talk to people that vote every time. And a lot of these folks in the hills of Oakland would answer a door and say, "Oh, school board, I don't have any kids," or "School board, my kids are all graduated." I'm like, well, do you care about the city? Do you care about children? Do you care about the economic development of the city? Do you care about like living conditions in the city? Because even if you don't send your kid to school, school board really matters because they're educating kids and based on what kind of education they receive, that will dictate the kind of city that you have, right? The direction that your city goes in, or your locality, your county, your state. So I think those two things are definitely like intertwined. And so I just wanted to like bounce that back off of you, because you kind of brought that up earlier. I think the bottom line is just getting people aware, getting people to care about education of Black and brown kids, especially given some of the data that we talked about today. It's like it's shameful, right? And folks ain't talking about it, but we're going to talk about it here. So with that, why don't you close this out, Omar?
Yeah, man. No, I look, that is one of the best wrap-ups and conclusions that I think I've heard in a long time, that addresses not just the needs, but like what people can do. It's like, look, I know, man, politics sucks, and keeping up with a school board race is even like a micro issue. And the thing is like, you know, I think it was Tip O'Neill, like ex-Speaker of the House, that popularized the statement, all politics are local, which came from, I think, Mayor Daley, which came from somebody else. Like, that's been repeated 17 different times by, you know, different political leaders. And like, what the statement is saying is that yes, it's important to care and vote for a president. And I think this one was a very interesting case with our last president. And I could name you very specific things that are good, that are changing as a result of this change of guard. Specifically, like my friend now writing the economic climate, the economic climate plan for the next 10 years, Allison, who works for the EPA. But the thing is that the massive change comes from the things that are happening locally. And while we focus on like the big ticket items of this senator and this president, if we're not focusing on these micro decisions, and these folks who are in our community and these school districts, because like we're electing jokers to these school districts. Like we were just having this conversation the other day with like the EPISD school district, is like that board is filled with like jokers, like people who talk shit about charters but have never visited my school.
They're grifters.
Don't understand a damn thing about school budget, don't understand a thing about education, don't understand a thing about data, don't understand a thing about what are the prescriptive needs that we need for brown people. Or I hear this bullshit of like, change takes a long time. So, you know, well, I'm like, how long? 30 years? Thanks for condemning 30 fucking years worth of kids into poverty. Like
2 generations.
Yeah. That's like a bullshit statement.
We'll get back to you on that. Yeah.
Yeah, and then they elect or they hire superintendents that are now in $5 million fraud suits, like our superintendent at EPISD is, or this Socorro superintendent that now just got a $600,000 payout for committing educational fraud.
Yeah,
guys, what I'm getting at is that if we are not paying attention to these people and electing good, solid people that care, and putting superintendents that have at least some level of like classroom experience. And yeah, like I'm glad they got a EDD or a PhD, but that doctorate doesn't mean shit if they've never had any level of actual practical success educationally, and then can expand it to a school district. If we're not paying attention to those things, we're going to keep getting the same results. And that is truly where the empowerment of the people comes from. So what can you do? Pay a little attention to what the hell's going on in your community, and start asking some good questions, and actually start coming out and supporting folks like us who are trying to do good work, so that it's not about charter and traditional. It's straight up just about how we run in the best public schools in our community. That's my thing.
Woo! All right. Well, thank you for that. And maybe a future episode on the critical role of the school board. There's so much talk about school boards now, mainly around you know, the reopening. Are we masking? Are we not masking? Critical race theory. You know, regardless of what it is, like people are paying attention to school boards now, and I think the fundamental nature of school boards, you know, historically, kind of like the hidden governance bureaucrat body that, you know, you could get elected to if you were a dog catcher, you know, is going to change, right? And it should change, because those are important roles. And so maybe a future episode there. But anyhow, thanks everybody for tuning in today. Again, this is episode 11 of Common Grounds podcast live stream, self-determination for Black and Brown children, the role that education plays. Thank you, Omar, for being here. It's great to have you back. And shout out to Dr. Cole, wherever he is right now.
Yeah, man.
He's out there. What's he doing?
Yeah,
I don't know.
Yeah, man, he's on the 1s and 2s supporting us, man, as he always does.
All right.
All right,
Goodbye.
man. Thank you,
See you next week, everybody.
Have a great week. Take care. Bye-bye.